For over a year, reporters and watchdog groups tracking Joni Lamb's property holdings settled on a number: 7. 7 houses, worth an estimated $11.7 million. That figure showed up in every headline, every clip, every comment thread. Then Trinity Foundation dug back through the county records one more time and uncovered something the county's own filing system had effectively concealed. A home Joni Lamb had bought back in 1991, a full year before her son Jonathan was even born, whose ownership record had been altered in a way that kept her name from surfacing in a routine search. That story hasn't been told on this channel before, and it's not alone. There's a $10 million life insurance policy that Daystar's parent company fought over in court, mentioned once, in passing, in a watchdog report, but never fully explored. There's a $1.67 million clergy housing allowance that only came to light because a woman wrongly accused of trying to blackmail the Lambs pushed the records into public view through a lawsuit she later abandoned. And there's a document laying out exactly what every adult member of the Lamb family, including the in-laws, was paid, right down to the dollar, one that Daystar's own attorneys tried to get a journalist to erase. You already know the big numbers. Tonight we're looking underneath them, at the parts Daystar clearly hoped would stay buried. Let's start with the house Trinity Foundation almost didn't find. In February 2025, Trinity Foundation, the Dallas watchdog group that's investigated religious financial misconduct for more than 3 decades, released its first comprehensive look at Joni Lamb's real estate. At that point, the tally was 6 properties worth roughly $11 million, 4 in Texas, 1 in Georgia, and a beach condo on Florida's Miramar Beach. But investigator Barry Bowen, who specializes in combing through public property and aviation records, and who also runs the organization's tracking project on televangelists' private jets, kept looking. That same week, he found something that shouldn't have been easy to locate through ordinary searches: a house in Grapevine, Texas, bought jointly by Joni and Marcus Lamb in 1991. 3 years before Daystar television network even existed, back when the couple was running a single station out of Dallas. Joni still owned that property as of the 2025 investigation. For decades, the Tarrant County records connected to it hadn't been formatted the way ownership records normally are, meaning a standard search wouldn't tie the house back to her name. Trinity Foundation isn't claiming Joni herself falsified the county's paperwork, only that the listing didn't match the usual public format, and that finding the link required real investigative digging, not a casual Zillow search. That discovery is what pushed the count from 6 houses to 7, and 7 is the number that stuck. But almost none of the coverage that followed mentioned how that 7th house was actually found, or the fact that it was purchased decades before Daystar even had a name. Here's a detail that's never made it into any previous coverage. None of the properties Joni acquired after Marcus's death involved a mortgage. Trinity Foundation checked. Every purchase appears to have been made entirely in cash. No loans, no financing. A television minister running a ministry that discloses none of its finances publicly, paying cash for multi-million-dollar homes, while a 76-year-old donor was mailing in $50 checks each month out of a $1,600 Social Security income. Here's something that's never been laid out in full on this channel, and it might explain the source of that cash. Trinity Foundation's research shows that Word of God Fellowship, Daystar's parent organization, has a history of holding large life insurance policies, including one $10 million policy that ended up in litigation. Think about what that means. A ministry structured as a church for tax purposes, holding and fighting over a $10 million insurance policy. Trinity Foundation's reporting ties this practice directly to the timing of Joni's post-Marcus purchases. Her Florida beach house and a second Colleyville property were both bought after Marcus died in November 2021. Based on the pattern of large policies the ministry is known to hold, Trinity Foundation's working theory is that proceeds from a policy on Marcus's life likely funded those purchases. If that's accurate, it raises a question nobody at Daystar has answered publicly. Was that policy owned personally by Marcus and Joni and paid for with their own money? Or was it a ministry-owned policy, funded by donor dollars, with Joni listed as the beneficiary? That distinction matters a great deal. Donor money flowing through an insurance policy into a private real estate purchase is a very different story than a couple's personal estate planning. Because Daystar operates under church status, it isn't required to file a public Form 990, so there's no document that could settle the question either way. The Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability, the industry's own self-policing body that requires audited financial statements from its members, doesn't count Daystar among them. It never has. That's not an oversight. It's a choice. Any ministry that wanted donors to verify how insurance payouts, salaries, and property purchases were funded could join the ECFA at any time. Daystar has had decades to do so and hasn't. This next piece has only ever been mentioned briefly before, but it's the origin point for nearly every financial figure that's ever come out of this story. Her name is Jeanette Hawkins. She was Daystar's marketing director, and in 2010, after Marcus Lamb's affair became public, Daystar's leadership accused her of trying to extort the ministry over it. Hawkins denied the accusation entirely. She said she'd suffered genuine psychological harm from the fallout, was pushed out of her job, and was ultimately hospitalized because of how the situation was handled. In October 2011, she sued Daystar for fraud. The case was eventually dismissed, and within 2 months, related lawsuits from the same period were dropped, with departing employees' lawyers citing biblical objections to Christians suing each other in civil court. But before that happened, Trinity Foundation successfully intervened in the Hawkins case specifically to get Daystar's sealed financial records opened up, and won. Those unsealed records are the foundation for nearly every dollar figure reported about the Lamb family's finances since. They showed that Word of God Fellowship paid Marcus and Joni Lamb $1,671,324 in tax-exempt clergy housing allowances between 2002 and 2011 alone. That's separate from salary, a tax-exempt benefit meant to help clergy cover housing costs, untouched by the income tax that applies to regular wages. Here's a detail that rarely gets connected. The Lambs bought the Colleyville property, which became Joni's primary home, in March 2004. That means from 2004 through at least 2011, while they already owned that home outright, they kept collecting a housing allowance meant to help cover housing costs they'd already paid for. A woman fighting an extortion accusation ended up being the reason any of this became public. Whatever actually happened with Jeanette Hawkins, her case is the reason we know about the housing allowance at all. There's a document that's been referenced only briefly before, the Internal Salary Review, but it deserves a full breakdown because it reveals compensation across the entire family, not just Joni. In March 2025, the Roy's report published Daystar's internal final salary review for 2023. It showed Joni's pay jumping from $436,750 in 2021 to $1,048,200 in 2022, a figure most followers of this story already know. What's less known is what the same document revealed about the rest of the family. Joshua Brown, Rachel Lamb Brown's husband, identified by online sleuths, though never confirmed publicly by name by Jonathan or Susie, as the person referred to as Pete in the abuse allegations, was slated for a 25% raise in 2023, bringing his salary to $125,000. Rachel herself was set for a 5% increase to $200,000. Rebecca Lamb, Joni's youngest daughter, reportedly earned $100,000 in 2022 as a Daystar contributor and podcaster. Her husband, Jonathan Weiss, not to be confused with Doug Weiss, was paid $185,000 for serving as Israel liaison, producer, and director of estate planning. That title is worth pausing on. Director of Estate Planning, at a ministry whose own family estate arrangements would soon become a matter of national scrutiny. Rebecca and Jonathan Weiss were both slated for 5% raises in 2023, bringing them to $105,000 and $195,000 respectively. This isn't just a story about one woman's paycheck. It's a picture of an entire extended family drawing six-figure salaries across multiple roles at a ministry with no standard nonprofit reporting requirements. When the Roy's report published this document, Daystar's attorneys sent a formal letter alleging Jonathan Lamb had breached his fiduciary duties by leaking it and demanded the outlet stop using the figures he'd provided. They claimed Joni's real salary was less than 7 figures and insisted all Daystar salaries, including hers, were set using recommendations from an independent compensation firm. The Roy's report refused to retract anything and kept the document published, redacted, exactly as received. 4 days after the original story broke in November 2024, Daystar's lawyer sent a separate 10-page letter accusing the outlet of running a smear campaign and demanding a full retraction. The Roy's report's attorney reviewed every claim in that letter and found that Daystar hadn't identified a single factual error in the reporting. No retraction followed. When the salary numbers became public, Daystar's response wasn't to explain them. It was to threaten the journalist who published them, without ever offering its own figures. This channel has covered the headline version of the $25 million Silvergate Bank/FTX loss before, but not what happened once Word of God Fellowship actually sued, or what Silvergate's defense revealed about how the ministry's money was handled. Ministry Watch, which has tracked the litigation closely, reports that Word of God Fellowship sued Silvergate, the now-defunct crypto-focused bank, for $25 million in ministry deposits that had gone toward a large-scale crypto lending operation connected to FTX's collapse. That word, participate, matters. This wasn't money sitting untouched in a checking account. According to Ministry Watch, Silvergate actively used the ministry's deposits within lending activity tied to the broader FTX ecosystem. Silvergate's defense has been to deny responsibility for client losses tied to FTX, essentially arguing that depositors like Word of God Fellowship accepted the risk that comes with banking at an institution serving crypto clients, and that the bank's collapse doesn't create direct liability for what happened to those funds. This is a fight over $25 million in donor money, playing out in federal court for more than 2 years, with no public acknowledgement from Daystar, not a sermon, not a broadcast segment, not a statement to donors explaining that part of what they gave got swept up in one of the largest financial frauds in American history. Here's an angle that hasn't been addressed before: just how shaky the public estimates of Joni Lamb's net worth actually are, and why that matters for how we interpret everything else. Trinity Foundation took the unusual step of publicly calling out the celebrity net worth websites that sprang up around this story, noting they often appear AI-generated, with little disclosed methodology and clear factual errors. One site, for instance, claimed Joni was born in Colleyville, Texas. She was actually born in Greenville, South Carolina. If a site can't get her birthplace right, its net worth figure deserves skepticism. The estimates vary wildly. One site put her net worth as low as $1 to $5 million. Another said $50 million. The two figures cited most often elsewhere are $16 million and $40 million. Trinity Foundation's own estimate, using U.S. Census Bureau data showing that home equity typically makes up about 27.8% of household wealth, calculated that if her $11 million plus in real estate followed that same ratio, her total net worth would land close to $41 million. For context, Marcus Lamb once told a church audience that Daystar itself had been recently appraised at over $1 billion. Trinity Foundation found that figure hard to believe, pointing out that Trinity Broadcasting Network, a much larger operation with over $1 billion in assets, including $488 million in securities as of 2018, operates at a scale Daystar has never come close to. The Christian Broadcasting Network reported just under $350 million in consolidated assets to the ECFA, a $1 billion claim from a ministry that never filed a public Form 990 and never joined the one body that could have verified it, is the kind of self-reported number this entire financial picture rests on. One more detail that hasn't appeared in any previous video: the newly built home Joni bought in Macon, Georgia in 2022, valued by Redfin at roughly $364,606, isn't where she actually lived. According to Jonathan Lamb, in comments to the Roy's report, that home is occupied by Joni's sister and brother-in-law. Sit with that for a second, alongside everything else here. A ministry president buys a house in cash in another state, and her extended family lives in it. That's not illegal, and it isn't automatically scandalous. Families help each other. But it does complicate the simplified 7 mansions narrative that shaped nearly every previous telling of this story, including on this channel. The reality is messier: a sprawling network of properties, some lived in by Joni, some by extended family, almost entirely paid for in cash, sitting inside a financial structure with no mandatory public disclosure. Individually, these facts are interesting. Together, they describe something more specific than simple greed: a property that was hard to trace through normal searches, a consistent pattern of all-cash purchases with no financing, a possible multi-million-dollar insurance structure with unclear ownership that may have funded property purchases after Marcus's death, an entire extended family, not just Joni, earning 6-figure salaries across loosely defined roles with little public accountability, including a director of estate planning, whose own family's estate became a national story, a $25 million loss tied to one of history's biggest financial frauds, fought quietly in court for over 2 years with zero acknowledgement to donors, and a decades-long refusal to join the one voluntary industry group that would have required audited financial statements. None of this, on its own, proves criminal wrongdoing. Trinity Foundation has been careful to frame much of it as documented pattern and reasonable inference rather than established fact, because church status nonprofits aren't legally required to open their books for a full accounting. That's exactly the point. Church status was never designed to enable fraud, but it was also never designed to guarantee transparency. When an organization keeps choosing the version of itself that requires the least accountability, church status instead of standard nonprofit status, no ECFA membership, no Form 990, properties that are difficult to trace, salary documents that trigger legal threats when journalists get hold of them, that pattern of choices is itself a form of information. It tells you what the organization prioritizes: donor trust or freedom from scrutiny.